Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a difficult week, to say the least. This sentiment analysis is going to be a little different, I think, in that I am seeing a lot of interesting things develop in the news cycle and the markets, and they don't add up. The tragedies of the week with the shooting in Minneapolis, with the Venezuelan situation, they have their place, and they have certainly driven the media narrative. That narrative has been pushed straight into the fear level as hard as possible. Since I started this chart, we can plainly see exactly where the narrative is and where the strength of that push is. It's hard, it's aggressive, and it's deliberate. This is probably the most disturbing aspect of this research, is just how deliberate the manipulation of the media is in pushing a specific narrative. When I go and I look at the actual financials for many of these, nothing correlates. Nothing correlates at all, because what is being told here isn't showing up in the real world psychological impact of society. I say that as somebody with a PhD in theology, extensive psychological training, degrees in business, mathematics, and computer sciences. There is a disconnect between real world news reporting and what the people, the consumption rate of this media, is actually accepting, at least on the level of those who can make a difference. There are those that are believing this hook, line, and sinker for either side of the narrative. But for the vast majority of people, they have as many questions as I do, and there is as many holes as you would expect in a sinking ship. And the sad truth of this is that both sides of the narrative are sinking. Their ships are drowning. But it's not stopping the hyperventilated, over-sensationalized rhetoric. That's where we are at right now. Even when we pan out to the rolling weekly chart for the human emotional sentiment analysis, we can still clearly see the extreme pattern push. We can see how things are being pushed and kept at certain degrees. And as we move through these charts, we'll see even more curious questions. That, I think, is the biggest problem of all. The questions with no answers. Logically, immigration affects economies. Oil prices affect economies, so forth. General violence in the world affects economies. It seems in the modern era of media, you can't even have an election without an economic disaster. But that is at least what the media wants us to believe. When we really examine the markets that should be affected, like the Venezuelan invasion or righteous indictment or whatever words the media wants to use to describe that, the disconnect is soaring oil prices or high gas prices or some existential disaster. But when you actually look at the oil prices, there's no existential disaster. It's business as usual. Seizing of the Venezuelan ships did nothing. All of the hyperventilating of the media has gone nowhere. A great level of effort has been pushed into driving a fear narrative that the actual market does not show. Nowhere in the market do you see this narrative. Instead, you see a 6-month trend that's still continuing. That's the whole point, I think, of what we're seeing. the disconnect between hyperventilated fantasy and reality. I have to put it that way because of the extreme level of trying to manipulate the general public versus the true weight and value of the situation. That's not to say I condone of any of it, but when you analyze the impact of what the media is trying to orchestrate versus what the people who actually have something to say about the market, the people in the market, the people buying and selling oil every day, the people who have their names on the rosters of the Venezuelan oil shipments in literally hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, they don't say the same thing. And it's their money. The disconnect is so egregious that it makes you really question the entire media narrative process. That really is the biggest thing I think we need to take away from this. The actual money of the stock market doesn't show what the media is trying to say. The media is saying fear. It's the end of the world. We're going to war. It's a catastrophe. The money in place, 401ks, retirement funds, hedge funds, institutions, they say it's business as usual. Here is the latest one-day stock market analysis. The actual 13 major indexes worldwide that depend on oil as part of their measurements. And the most recent data has been reasonably good. In fact, it's been greedy, very, very greedy. And even now, as things unfold in New York City with the trial, the indictment, the evidence, whatever is available within the news cycle, prices are still showing positive impact. If we look at the 3-day, we see that it is more neutral. And if we look at the weekly, this last week has been incredibly good. We can see the greed level of the stock market accelerating, and we can even see the push in the strength. The very important metric, the strength of the movement. We are seeing a positive, bullish, greedy attitude, despite the fact that the U.S., according to the media, invaded Venezuela. Now, this indictment took place under the previous administration. So this isn't just one president going rogue, but it is within the entire political structure of the United States. Something that doesn't get reported very often. Is it accurate? I don't know. Is Maduro guilty of all the crimes he's been charged with? I don't know that either. What I do know is that the media narrative doesn't match what I see in real numbers from the stock market. That is the biggest problem I see altogether. Even when we extrapolate out into the 30-day rolling average, the market has been greedy, going all the way back to November of 2025. So it should have been a fearful point according to the media. The brink of war hasn't stopped investors. And again, this is all 13 global indexes. And we can trace this back historically when you look at the 2008 housing bubble, the market crashes along the way, the gas shortage in the 70s. You can see the pattern over and over. The historical manipulation of situation versus reality, where sometimes they do align, like the gas shortage of 74, 75. And then sometimes where they don't align, like what we see right now. We can keep going, and we are going to go through and look at a few more charts. For example, the Forex charts. Euro USD, British Pound Australian Dollar, USD Canadian. If we look at the market, we see the same problem in Forex. There's a disconnect between media and money. The media is saying one thing, the market is saying something different. And even when you look at the strength of the movement, it's barely even moving. Moving to the 3-day, we see that tiny precipitous greed push, but we see next to no strength behind it. Just another day in the market where nobody cares. Moving to the 7-day, we can see the greed beginning to push again, but again, next to nothing for strength. From the standpoint of this market, what we're looking at is noise. That is the most disturbing disconnect of all. The world's money sees the media as nothing but noise. Even if we look further, noise. In fact, the entirety of the last 6 months has really been just noise. Very, very little movement. Very stable, reasonably speaking. Financially speaking. Countries, when put against each other, GDP, CPI, all of the financial vectors we use on a daily basis to make our investing decisions, they show a reasonably healthy market. And that is important. They don't show an existential crisis. They don't show a major fear where investors are looking to run. That's not to say that there isn't good reasons to withdraw your money from the market or from a particular company or from a particular asset. Those do exist. But the entirety of the market itself doesn't show the level of fear the media is trying to project onto the public. There's more fear in the cryptocurrency market right now than there is in the world's money markets. Let that sink in for a minute. Hundreds of billions of dollars, rubles, rupees, yuan, and whatever else is out there is showing next to nothing. But the average person, which is what most of the cryptocurrency market is showing fear. And these events, when we look at them, they do coincide with the media. Now, there are some divergencies, but those divergencies aren't significant enough to change the basic precepts and principles of what is happening in the market. The basic contexts that the cryptocurrency market is mirroring to some degree what the media wants to project. We can see that clearly. Now, this is actual asset analysis, numerical analysis of each and every pair on an exchange. 1,300 of them to produce this chart. That doesn't mean every asset is doing bad, but it's enough of a mirror that we can begin to see the correlation and begin to question why. Why is this happening? Why does it seem so convenient? What is the purpose behind this correlation? The answers are just as cryptic as you would expect. You have the usual media manipulation. You have the usual market issues. But that is surface level. That doesn't dive into or dig into the deeper underlying meaning of why this correlation between the cryptocurrency market and the news media agenda is so tied together. Is this because retail investors are more easily swayed, more easily manipulated? We have to ask that question. We have to take a look at that context. Putting it all together, we can see just how hyperventilated the entire market really is. It's an adrenaline rush and a dopamine hit gone bad in both directions. While the markets stay reasonably neutral and flat, stock, forex, completely oblivious to the world, the aspects of human emotion are all over the place in heavy manipulations. That's disturbing. It's disturbing that the majority of the world media is pushing one central narrative. It's disturbing that the majority of retail traders are so easily manipulated. It's a contextual reality of a fundamental flaw within our own critical reasoning capabilities. How do we even proceed with this kind of knowledge? When we look at the market as a whole, and we really, and I mean really, look at what is being spoon-fed to our societies, there's a lot of questions we should be asking. And quite frankly, I don't think we're ever going to get the answers. About the only thing I can say is that a cautious, risk-aware approach needs to be evaluated. Even if the market swings greedy, why? Nothing can be taken for granted, and everything must be scrutinized. Careful planning to your own personal situation is the only way you are going to survive the market. Careful understanding of your preferred market is the only way you're going to make long-term money. For example, the silver crash last week that caused shorts to go into liquidation. Who in their right mind puts that much money on silver in a short to the point that they're so over leveraged they damn near destroy their entire business? That doesn't even begin to make sense. What happened to the 1% risk factor? What happened to collateral, hedging? What happened to a stop loss that would keep some sanity within the process? What happened to dollar cost averaging? What happened to any level of human reason versus hundreds of millions of dollars in one position trying to manipulate the market in such a greedy and disgusting way? That is what causes failure. That is what causes liquidation, and that is what destroys lives. That level of irresponsible trading is mind-boggling, and I can't even begin to wrap my own mind around how basic risk management wasn't even applied. But I guess when it's not your money, you don't care who loses. And that seems to be the theme I got out of that whole discussion. It was not his money. He didn't care. Let's gamble, go for broke, and somebody else can suffer the consequences. That doesn't work. That's wrong. But that's the kind of world we live in, where everybody else suffers the consequences of a few greedy people trying to manipulate the market. Whether it's through the media or through stupid decisions like what we saw with the silver market. Both are wrong. Both are dangerous. Share your thoughts about this last week. What do you think next week is going to unfold to? How do you see the market around you with the news that you actually have in your area? Let me know. Next week, I don't think is going to be much a difference from this week. I think caution is going to be the better part of valor. And I think nothing is going to trump a proper risk strategy. Thank you.